In a world rife with plundering, assassination has emerged as the most effective way to eliminate one's foes. Our epic saga unfolds with intrigue and danger in the renowned guild, the Knights of Glory. At the secret base of the Knights of Glory, Master Devea convenes a meeting. As all the members take their seats, vigilant knights stand guard, fully armed. The members chat among themselves when a masked figure enters, visibly puzzled by the presence of so many guards. Master Devea appears deeply concerned, her fingers interlaced as she clears her throat to capture the man's attention. She informs him about the alarming number of guards, revealing that a report from their spy indicates a likely assassination attempt is underway. As Master Devea voices her concerns, another person sitting casually in a chair chuckles and teases her, suggesting it's typical to deploy an executioner before a siege begins. With mounting anxiety, she responds that while it may seem normal to him, the situation here is different. She emphasizes that this killer is on an entirely different level, necessitating their utmost vigilance. During their conversation, they are startled by a sudden swarm of birds with menacingly sharp beaks appearing in the sky above. In no time, she commands the guards to take aim and shoot down these perilous creatures. As they observe the ineffective results of their attacks, the guards grow disheartened, realizing their ammunition is futile against the birds. The machine-like birds relentlessly attack, causing explosions and severe damage to the guards, other people, and buildings. Master Devea, shielding herself, watches in horror as her people call for help. She screams in fear when a lifeless body falls in front of her, struck down by these mechanical birds. She gasps in shock as a bird strikes her, inflicting only minor wounds instead of killing her. She would have died like the others, but saved by her rare sacrificial magic necklace, which takes the place of the wearer when fatal harm is inflicted. After she manages to defeat all the birds, addressing her assembled people, she acknowledges the terrifying nature of the attack and urges the guards to remain vigilant, as her powerful necklace has limitations and requires time to reactivate. Everyone concurs with her advice. While addressing the crowd, she suddenly appears confused upon noticing something suspicious nearby. Initially, she cannot comprehend what it is, but then she screams in terror upon realizing it's an explosive, which detonates with a deafening blast, causing fire and smoke to engulf the area. The sound of collapsing walls and buildings shattering fills the air. She collapses to the ground, her body injured, and her mind filled with disbelief at the presence of an explosive. It seems impossible. She remains in shock as she realizes that the murderer must have planted it during the construction of this place, despite their thorough inspections. Overwhelmed by the intense pain and injuries, she succumbs to her wounds and loses her life. Meanwhile, player Rait, immersed in virtual life online, VLO, watches the explosive aftermath caused by his birds through his smart monocle. As he hears Master Devea's concerns about the blast, he realizes she's almost correct, but not entirely. The device he used wasn't an explosive, but a magical power transfer device. While observing through his heads-up display, he receives a notification of a new email. With his sharp-beaked bird in hand, he opens the message to find a congratulatory note announcing that he has earned gold for completing the mission to eliminate Master Devea. Reflecting on his recent mission, Rait considers the limitations of traditional explosives, which are only effective when buried up to 5 meters underground. Beyond that depth, the impact is absorbed by the earth, making it safe and ineffective against high-level players. Instead, he had deployed an enchanted power infusion device disguised as birds. When infused with substantial magic power, even debris can explode. Feeling a sense of pride, Rait appreciates his ingenuity, recognizing that no matter how sophisticated an assassination method is, opponents will eventually devise defenses. Confident in his abilities, he is undeterred by any countermeasures. He takes satisfaction in his skill to innovate new killing techniques and accomplish his missions, regardless of the precautions his enemies put in place. As he observes his power-enhancing birds, he reflects on how things have unfolded and how they ought to be. He remains satisfied with this method, yet he is curiously wondering how long it will remain effective. His role as a producer allows him to create various items, a skill he's leveraged to become an assassin in the virtual reality massive multiplayer online game, also known as VRMO. In this VLO game, death carries significant consequences compared to other games. The rules dictate that a player who dies will have their level reduced by 1. Additionally, they will face a penalty that prevents them from logging in for 3 days. For high-level players, losing a level feels like watching 100 hours of effort disappear. While this penalty is already harsh, the inability to log in for 3 days is even more punishing. In guild battles, if the main force of a guild is killed and cannot log in during a crucial moment, defeat is inevitable. Many guilds have collapsed because their key members were incapacitated at the worst possible time. However, in VLO, death isn't easy to come by. Most players, when defeated, are simply knocked out and revived in town. Only a few powerful bosses and other players can truly kill a player. Naturally, players don't sit idly by and allow themselves to be killed. Many items, like the magic necklace worn by Master Devea, can prevent death. For top players in guilds, it's common to have multiple layers of defense against being killed, making their chances of death in a direct confrontation lower than 2%. In such scenarios, killers come into play. When top guilds are about to clash, they often employ dozens of murderers, leading to fierce battles among them. Rait considers himself a unique case in this regard. Unlike most assassins who specialize in combat roles like archers for long-range attacks or dual bladers for high DPS in close quarters, Rait has a production job. He uses poisons and explosives to eliminate his targets. While he may lose in direct combat compared to those with combat jobs, his unconventional methods of killing are nearly impossible to counter. If tasked with eliminating a top-ranking organization member, a killer with a 15% success rate is considered exceptional. Yet Rait's success rate in assassinations exceeds 99.9%. He takes immense pride in having completed over 1,000 missions with only one failure, confident that his success rate is unmatched among the assassins in VLO. Deep in thought, Rait is snapped back to reality by the notification of a new email on his screen. Surprised as such messages are rare, he opens it. The email is from someone claiming to be the goddess Mises, requesting his help. Initially, Rait dismisses it as a prank because, according to VLO's rules, certain words, like God, cannot be used. Yet the mystery remains as to why these words are prohibited. Rait is incredulous at the idea that a player named Goddess Mises could exist. Using his virtual reality augmented display, he searches for this enigmatic figure and places a call, still doubting whether such a person can truly be real. As the audio call connects, he is startled by the calm and assured voice on the other end, which suggests that Rait has indeed read the email. Puzzled, Rait questions whether a player with God in their name can genuinely exist and wonders if the game developers have lifted the restrictions on such names. Goddess Mises then explains that she uses the name God because she is indeed a deity. She surprises Rait further by revealing that she created the game herself, allowing her to choose any name she wishes. Though Rait finds the goddess's self-importance a bit off-putting, he takes a deep breath and asks for the details of her request. Mises informs him that his mission is to eliminate an evil deity from another world, Majura Zul. Rait is puzzled by the unfamiliar name, Majura Zul, as he recalls all the notable players he's encountered. Since this name is unknown to him, he perceives the target as relatively simple. Confident in his abilities, he agrees to take on the mission, believing it will be straightforward as long as he gets the location details. Rait quickly agrees to the mission and inquiries about the reward. Preferring a straightforward payment, he requests gold. To his astonishment, Goddess Mises offers a staggering 1,000 tons of gold. Initially frustrated by the seemingly outrageous offer, Rait demands a serious response. Mises reassures him that she is indeed serious about the enormous reward. Goddess Mises calculates that 1,000 tons of gold is worth around 5 trillion yen and promises to pay Rait in full, although the payment will come from the other side of the world. Despite the logistical challenge, Rait agrees to the mission. Mises, thrilled by his acceptance, expresses her gratitude and warns that if he refuses, she will face dire consequences. Rait, initially skeptical, is alarmed when Mises reveals a teleportation stone on his screen. He requests a moment to prepare, but Mises, pressed for time, informs him she will simply transport him to the target. As Rait is enveloped by a magnetic wave, he requests additional time to prepare since he lacks a combat role for physical confrontation. He asks for details about his target to strategize effectively. Mises, apologizing, informs him that he cannot bring any items with him, a unique aspect of this teleportation. She reassures him that the situation is under control and his skills will be invaluable in this new world. His target, Majura Zul, is an evil god and the only other deity apart from her in this realm. Upon arrival in the jungle, Rait is bewildered by the unfamiliar and hostile environment, which seems ill-suited for a straightforward mission. He attempts to use the GPS, but finds it useless, realizing Mises' warning about not bringing items was accurate. Despite the jungle's resemblance to VLO, its astonishing quality surpasses anything he has seen in the game. The vivid detail, even in small things like a ladybug, convinces him that no game engine could replicate this realism. Stunned, he questions the goddess, wondering if he has truly been transported to another world. He looks worried as she repeatedly apologizes. Noting his concern, she sorrowfully admits that while she successfully teleported him to this world, she wasn't powerful enough to choose the right destination. Confused, he questions her power, and she explains that her dwindling number of believers has weakened her abilities. As a goddess, her power comes from the faith of her followers. She further clarifies that if a god loses all faith, they lose their divine power and eventually vanish, along with all memory of them. Upon hearing this, he realizes she is likely in that dire situation. She commends him for his quick wit. She reveals that all gods except herself and Majora Zul have been obliterated by a malevolent deity, leaving only the two of them. She explains that while Majora Zul has many names, only two denote his true essence. Curious about her own names, he learns she has none, as a god's power is tied to their true name and the faith of their worshippers. He is still puzzled about why Majora Zul has multiple names. She explains that it's a tactic to erode the followers of other gods by creating competing cults with similar doctrines, drawing believers away. In extreme cases, these cults resort to violence, such as killing or torturing followers to force a change in worship. He realizes that to vanquish a god, one must either annihilate their followers or compel them to switch allegiances, thereby sapping the god's strength. He looks bewildered when he hears a buzzing from his mechanical device and questions her about it. On the screen, the connection is distorted and blurry as she apologizes, explaining that her power is too depleted to maintain a stable link. He shouts in disbelief, realizing she is leaving him alone in the forest. The signal degrades further, making their conversation indecipherable before it cuts off completely. Now alone in the wilderness, he contemplates his situation with frustration, recognizing the magnitude of the challenge before him. He places his hand on his head in disbelief, but appreciates his decision to accept the mission, finding it intriguing despite the lack of external requests for help. Surveying his surroundings, he begins to walk, prioritizing his safety before tackling the assassination task. Climbing onto a large stone, he notices there are no signs of other people. He recalls his VLO skills, noting that while he can't bring any tools into this world, he can still use his senses. He detects several mid-level threat monsters nearby, indicating the forest's danger. With his hand extended, he conjures pure water using his magic. As he drinks, he realizes that utilizing magic could enhance his production skills. After securing the water in a bucket, he sets himself up for survival, easing the difficulty of his situation. After spotting the monsters, he hurries to prepare, knowing that facing them unarmed means certain death. First, he needs metal. Although he initially desires iron sand, its unavailability forces him to use the nearby bauxite rock. Excited by the prospect, he extracts aluminum from the rock with his magic. He forms this aluminum into a cube weighing about 500 grams and begins the metamorphosis process. By prioritizing the extracted aluminum and considering the mana needed for the transformation, he crafts a sharp, needle-like weapon. Examining the needle, he realizes that while it deals minimal physical damage, he can find ways to make up for its shortcomings. He is thrilled to discover a death root in the jungle, an unexpected find. With great excitement, he digs it up by hand and grinds the root using a stone. He then smears its sap onto the needle's point, transforming it into a makeshift weapon. While this weapon may not be sufficient for high-ranking monsters, he is confident in his combat skills and believes the needle will be effective against the enemies he's encountered. Shifting his focus, he examines the item box on his screen, only to find that it does not display any status. Realizing this game is different from the previous one he played, he contemplates the change. As he ventures through the jungle, he tests his powers due to the lack of items. Using a martial arts crush kick, he strikes a massive tree, splitting it into two halves and causing the birds perched on it to scatter. Relieved to see his offensive skills are as potent as expected, he realizes his abilities are on par with his status in VLO. This success grants him a survival boost. Noticing the time, he decides to build a shelter. He crafts a sharp crosscut saw from the aluminum cube he previously created. With this tool, he swiftly cuts down large trees and stacks the timber. Forming numerous large cubes, he begins constructing a boundary wall. Using his runic magic circles, he meticulously sizes and assembles the wood, creating a beautiful, sturdy home. Once the house is complete, he finally relaxes and steps inside his new abode. Upon entering his new home, he is greeted by a pleasant scent, which boosts his confidence. Despite having built the house in just 3 hours, it stands impressively well. He notes that the house is larger than necessary for a single person, and then he shifts his focus to collecting food. Recalling that artifacts powered by mana stones can activate various spells, he knows these stones are crucial and only found in monster bodies. To obtain them, he prepares for hunting. First, he uses his crosscut saw to cut trees and creates 2 long wooden planks. With the help of his runic magic circles and metamorphosis, he successfully crafts a bow. Because his aluminum isn't sufficient for a proper melee weapon and the needle he previously made will contaminates the meat, so he creates this bow to hunt and gather mana stones from monsters. After crafting the bow, he focuses on making the bowstring. He cuts thin shoots from trees and uses his magic to extract numerous fibers from the vines. Keeping their elasticity, he continuously enchants them before twisting them into a strong thread. Braiding the threads together, he strengthens the bowstring and attaches it to the bow, also creating arrows for hunting. Venturing into the jungle, he climbs high into a tree and uses his magic to scout for enemies. Performing reconnaissance, he notes that the nearest enemy is 2 o'clock away. His keen observation leads him to a frog, which he identifies as edible and also monster, and he swiftly targets it with an arrow. Initially, the frog takes a hit, but then leaps to the same height as him, revealing that his arrows lack the power to kill it. Realizing he must shoot with full strength, he leaps from the tree and, soaring through the air, fires his arrows with all his might. The frog, after being hit, extends its tongue threateningly. With one final, decisive shot, he pierces the frog, causing it to fall lifelessly to the ground. Triumphant, he returns to his home, savoring the frog's meat, which tastes remarkably like chicken. Pleased with his successful hunt and enjoying his first fancy meal, he feels secure and well provided. With food, water, and safety ensured, his survival is set on an easy mode, and he relishes the comfort of his new life. He carefully extracts a poison sac from the frog's body using a knife, knowing that these sacs are essential for creating mana. A single frog contains about 10 poison sacs, so he handles them with great caution to avoid contamination. With some suspicion, he attempts to create mana, believing that the strength of the monster suggests the mana stone should be powerful. Now equipped with food and a mana stone, and he also has defeated a significant monster, now sets his sights on his final goal, defeating the evil god Mazura Zul. However, he remains uncertain about the god's true nature, and whether he can trust goddess Mises. Despite these doubts, he advises himself not to be distracted by these thoughts. Having accepted the mission, his sole focus is to eliminate his target. To accomplish this, he uses his magic circle to create some essential artifacts. After deciding to create some artifacts, Rait sits on a chair and begins crafting a magic detecting device using metamorphosis. Although he knows the process, he lacks the ideal materials, so he improvises with what he has, including his crosscut saw. Using magic, he forms a new metal cutter with a sharp point. Satisfied with the tool's balance as he twirls it on his fingers, Rait imbues it with magic. He holds a metal plate with a capture and shapes it using the sharp point of the device, producing a metal cutting sound in the air. As he works, Rait contemplates that the artifact he's building will only detect magic power used to cast spells. Since only humans can wield magic, the device's activation would signal the presence of a magic-using human nearby. Assessing the spike's sharpness, he chooses to utilize it as an antenna to boost the artifact's sensitivity. Rait realizes that the effectiveness of these magic detectors hinges significantly on the caliber of the mana stones and spikes employed. This is why he meticulously infuses the spike with magic, gradually shaping it under enchantment instead of depending entirely on metamorphosis. While metamorphic magic is straightforward, it produces less optimal outcomes compared to forging. He then saturates the spike and binds all the materials together with his magic. Excited by the final look of his magic detector, Rait observes that it appears capable of detecting anything within a 1 kilometer radius. To test it, he places a glass of water near the device. The water clings to his fingers, confirming the device's functionality. Satisfied, he drinks the water with a rumble of contentment. As dinner time approaches, Rait steps outside, skewers the frog meat he previously hunted using a tool morphed from a hammer, and to burn the fire he uses tree scraps from his house-building efforts. Chapter 2.2. After gathering all the materials to roast the frog meat, he attempts to ignite the fire but is surprised to discover that he has exhausted most of his mana, leaving him unable to start the flames. He decides to keep the fire minimal and, with a final effort of magic, successfully ignites it. The sound of meat sizzling fills the air. As he checks the meat with his hand, he thinks it needs a bit more roasting, as it wouldn't be pleasant if undercooked meat upset his stomach. He sprinkles a pinch of salt over the meat and begins to savor this luxurious roasted meal. While eating, he is pleasantly surprised to find the frog meat much greasier than he expected, as he initially thought it would be quite bland. The simple sprinkle of salt enhances the flavor, making it unexpectedly delicious. He savors the meal with great joy, realizing the truth in the saying that hunger is the best seasoning. Though he indulges in the feast, he grows concerned about the remaining food. Wanting to preserve it, he realizes he'll need to build a fridge or freezer, which requires a mana stone. However, with his mana nearly depleted and the prospect of battling monsters unappealing at the moment, and he also does not want any further fights with monsters for mana this time. So he decides to store the remaining food in his item box, though he's unsure if the meat will spoil. Resolving to deal with it later if needed, he relaxes for now. Carrying a flickering lamp, he enters his bedroom and places it on the side table. As he lies down to sleep, he notices the bed is uncomfortably hard, but he brushes it off, focusing instead on the possibility of encountering others in this world. Uncertain of whether the inhabitants are friendly, he resolves not to venture out until he's made proper preparations. As he lays down, he closes his eyes, resolving to focus on potion making, determined not to repeat yesterday's mistake of fighting without them. The next morning, he emerges from his house, noticing birds soaring in the sky. He feels sore and exhausted, having slept without a mattress. Determined to find one, he ventures into the forest in search of materials. During his search, excitement grips him as he stumbles upon Mia's herbs, essential for crafting elixirs. Though these herbs rank low among medicinal plants, he knows that when enchanted and mixed, they can produce a level 2 tonic. He eagerly gathers the herbs into a pile. Finally, he sets out to create a magical healing liquid. Using his magic, he mashes the plants, collects their sap in a bowl, mixes it with water, and places it all on the stove to simmer. After a few minutes of boiling, he successfully concocts a level 2 potion. He's pleased with his achievement, even though this elixir is 500 times weaker than the level 11 potions high-level players in VLO used to create. Still, he's content, knowing that something is better than nothing. While preparing the potion in his kitchen, he initially considers making a level 4 serum. However, he quickly dismisses the idea, realizing that without proper laboratory flasks, it's not feasible at this time. After crafting jars through metamorphosis, he carefully pours the enchanted liquid into them, securing each with a lid. With 5 jars filled, he feels reassured, knowing he's now prepared for battle. Venturing out of his home with his bow in hand, he resolves to stay nearby and hunt monsters, mindful of the many artifacts he still needs to create. So he uses his abilities to scan the area for enemies, detecting a significant number of them. Curious about how many mana stones he might gather from these monsters, he begins by targeting a monster bird, followed by pig-like and mushroom creatures, among others. He spends the entire day collecting mana from these monsters until nightfall. Returning home at night, he is thrilled by the substantial mana he has gathered, envisioning the numerous useful artifacts he can now craft. His first task is to create a stun grenade. To do this, he places a mana stone on the table, pierces it with a needle, and then crushes it. Although he feels a pang of regret at destroying the stone, he reassures himself that the sacrifice is necessary to produce the flashbangs. To do so, he crushes a large quantity of mana stones, creating a pile of fragments. Infusing them with light magic, he notices that a single fragment only emits a brief, faint glow. Realizing that combining hundreds of thousands of these fragments could produce a blinding flash, he gathers them together. Using circle magic, he merges the materials into a bar, completing the flashbang. Unsatisfied with just one, he decides to craft 3 more, repeating the process. Afterward, he's exhausted, his body aching from the unexpectedly difficult task, but he's relieved to have finished. With a weary expression, he massages his arm, feeling the strain from crafting 3 concussion grenades by hand. The effort leaves him with a sense of fatigue, but he reflects that it's still nothing compared to the challenge of creating high-level items. Suddenly, he's startled by the vibrating sound from his magic detector. Realizing that another human is using magic nearby, he quickly grabs his detector, the newly crafted grenades, his bow and arrows, and swiftly exits the house, ready to investigate. As he dashes through the forest, anxiety grips him, unsure whether the magic user nearby is an ally or adversary. Despite the uncertainty, he remains determined to investigate. He alters his course based on his detector's guidance and activates stealth support, positioning a flashbang to avoid detection. Aware of the potential danger, he presses on, guided by his device's proximity alert. Scaling a tree and leaping from branch to branch, he finally arrives at his destination, ready to confront the source of the magic. Perched on the tree, he observes with intrigue as a swordsman battles a fearsome, toothy giant. Nearby, a girl with a sorrowful voice pleads, unable to abandon the sword-wielding man and her injured father. As the colossal bear monster advances toward the brave swordsman, the anxious girl remains by her father's side, who lies on the ground, adding to the tension of the scene. After assessing the forest situation, he realizes they're under attack by a bear. The man's injuries are severe, and the girl is defenseless. Even the knight, their protector, suffers from a wounded shoulder. Recognizing the dire circumstances, he decides to intervene, hoping to gather valuable information. Swiftly, he leaps from the tree to the ground, cancels his stealth support, and loudly announces his intention to help. The knight, hearing this, looks at him in bewilderment. He sprints toward the beast with his bow and arrows, where the knight struggles to fend off the creature. The monster, appearing confused, is about to strike the swordsman when Rait swiftly hurls his flashbang grenade at them. He then ignites it with his magic, causing a blinding light so intense that the girl and others shield their faces, uncertain of what's happening. The bear monster roars in agitation, but the light does no harm. Angered, Rait quickly uses poison needles, targeting the creature's eyes. The beast howls in pain, yet the poison seems ineffective, making Rait suspect that this bear monster is of a higher rank than those he's faced before. He begins to doubt whether the poison will be enough to bring it down. To amplify the poison, Rait quickly picks up an arrow and, using his magic circle and metamorphosis, creates a potent toxin at its tip. Aiming carefully, he fires the arrow, hitting the monster. This time, the beast roars in agony, its growls intensifying. As he prepares to strike again, Rait notices the girl crying and moving, so he warns her to stay still unless she wants to join the battle. He then fires another arrow, enraging the monster even further, causing it to charge at him. Suddenly, the creature collapses, writhing in pain as poisonous fluid leaks from its mouth. Seeing this, Rait finally relaxes, confident that he has nearly vanquished the beast. This time, the poison takes effect because Rait's arrow is laced with a potent blend of 3 different magical venoms. The first is a neurotoxin derived from death root, the deadliest of the trio. The second is a hemorrhagic toxin extracted from mushrooms, added to ensure the bear's demise, especially if it resists the neurotoxin. Within seconds, the beast emits a loud, agonized roar and becomes paralyzed. Confidently, Rait observes the creature as it succumbs to the poison. The final toxin is a paralyzing agent from frog venom sacs, which immobilizes the target, allowing the other toxins to take full effect. This venom also suppresses cerebral activity, providing the monster with temporary relief from pain, meaning it wouldn't realize its fate until the last moments, avoiding a futile struggle before death. After defeating the monster, Rait approaches the group. The knight, rubbing his eyes, asks what happened, as the flashbang grenade had momentarily blinded him with a burst of white light. Glancing at the dead bear, the knight, in disbelief, questions if Rait was responsible. Confidently, Rait confirms he killed the beast. Noticing the old man's severe injuries, Rait shifts their focus, explaining that since he can still move, the bear's poison is likely slow-acting, a small silver lining. However, he warns them that the bear's claws inflicted deep chest wounds, and without immediate help, this man could die from blood loss before the poison takes effect. Rait decides to save this wounded man's life by tending to his wounds first. As Rait steps forward to help the wounded man, the swordsman blocks his path, expressing gratitude for saving their lives but unwilling to let him proceed further. Rait initially remains silent, his gaze shifting to the girl, who watches anxiously, deeply concerned for her father's well-being. After being stopped by the swordsman, who bears a distinctive badge on his uniform, Rait realizes these people are not ordinary. The swordsman sternly informs Rait that he cannot allow him to assist them. Rait exhales, crosses his arms, and calmly states that he doesn't mind being stopped, but warns that the wounded man will die without his help. The swordsman, furious, forbids Rait from calling the man old, as he clearly doesn't understand the importance of this person's reputation. Unfazed by the anger, Rait confidently warns that if this man is truly so significant, it would be even more tragic to let him die. After assessing the dire situation, Vard first glances at the innocent girl with a worried expression and then at the suspicious wounded man. After a moment of contemplation, he asks Rait for a guarantee that he can save the man. In response, Rait reveals a flask filled with tonic and calmly states that while he can't offer any guarantees, he will do his utmost to help. He then hands the flask to the guard, instructing him to give it to the wounded man to drink. The swordsman initially examines the bottle with suspicion, sniffing it and cautiously tasting it with his tongue. Growing frustrated with these actions, Rait impatiently suggests that the knight pick a jar for him to drink from, proving the medicine's safety. The knight, after a moment of hesitation, hands a jar to Rait, who swiftly drinks it and shows the empty container as proof. Still cautious, the knight holds onto the jar, then looks to the girl for her consent. With a sorrowful expression, she quickly agrees to give the medicine to her father. Without delay, this girl opens the lid, supports her father's head, and administers the medicine. After the man takes the medicine, both the girl and the knight are astonished as his wounds begin to heal on their own. The knight exclaims in disbelief, recognizing it as a high-level magical healing liquid. Rait, however, feels puzzled since he only gave them a level 2 tonic, leading him to conclude that they are unfamiliar with crafting such potions. He then offers the knight some of the tonic to treat his severely wounded shoulder. Although initially hesitant and inclined to save it for someone else, the knight eventually accepts after Rait assures him that he has plenty of these healing liquids. After drinking the tonic and feeling his shoulder start to heal, the knight thanks Rait, expressing his debt. However, Rait reminds him that even with the tonic, he's not entirely out of danger. The bear's poison still poses a serious threat. The knight, realizing the urgency, urgently asks for help with the poison. Rait agrees to assist in inquiries about the progression of the venom. The knight reveals that his fingertips are beginning to feel numb, but this is the only symptom he has observed so far. Upon hearing this, Rait quickly deduces that the poison is a paralyzing toxin. If left untreated, it will advance to the heart and prove fatal. With assurance, Rait informs the knight that he can't create an antidote here and suggests moving the injured man to his home. The knight, enraged, protests at Rait's referring to the man as old, but Rait interrupts, insisting they proceed to his house to save the man's life. Despite his anger, the knight reluctantly agrees, hoisting the injured man onto his shoulder and heading toward Rait's home. Upon arriving, Rait opens the gate and ushers the knight inside. The knight, intrigued, remarks on the unusual setting of the house. Rait agrees and asks him to wait in the lounge while he prepares the antidote. Suspicious, the knight inquires if Rait is a doctor because of his skill with drugs. Rait, seated on the floor and working on the antidote, admits he's not a doctor but can create many things. Concerned, he offers the knight the chance to observe his process, ensuring him it's safe. The knight agrees, taking a few minutes to inspect the room, then carefully lays the injured man on the bed and covers him with a blanket. While preparing the antidote, Rait offers some food to the knight, who tastes it before passing it to the girl. As Rait busily works on the antidote, the knight, concerned, reports that his arm is going numb and asks if there's enough time. Rait, focused on his task, reassures him that they have ample time. Noticing that the poison is only affecting his arm, Rait concludes that the toxin is advancing slowly, allowing him sufficient time to complete the antidote. Examining the herbs with concern due to their poor quality, Rait resolves to mix them meticulously to achieve a viable antidote. He carefully places all the herb leaves into a bowl, knowing that with better ingredients, a single enchantment would suffice. As he diligently prepares the tonic, the guard watches him intently. The girl peeks from the bedroom where her father lies, visibly relieved upon hearing that Rait has finished the antidote. She hurries out to grab one of the 2 bowls of tonic for her father. But the guard, Goldo, intervenes, wanting to test it first to ensure it's safe. After drinking from one bowl, he notices an immediate and remarkable improvement in his arm, prompting him to exclaim with excitement about the tonic's effectiveness. Seeing the guard's numbness vanish instantly, the girl anxiously asks Goldo if everything is all right. With astonishment, he confirms that the insensibility has disappeared, leaving her overjoyed. But with an impressed expression, Goldo asks Rait with keen anticipation if it's an antidote. Rait confirms and urges him to administer the tonic to the elderly man without delay, as his condition is more critical than Goldo's. Both Goldo and the girl swiftly move to the room, carrying the tonic, and the girl assists her father in drinking it while Rait stands at the door, observing. After drinking the tonic, the old man's face relaxes, bringing relief to both the girl and Goldo. Rait interrupts to inform them that the poison has been addressed and the old man has been treated, advising that with rest, he should awaken soon. He hands the girl an additional jar of medicine, advising her to give it to her father. She gratefully accepts it, thanking him. As Goldo inspects the jar, he takes a seat and, folding his hands, asks the girl to explain who they are and why they were in such a perilous situation. The girl requests time until her father wakes up to provide the details. Rait agrees and advises her to share the information which she can share now. Goldo then introduces himself with a hand on his heart, stating that he is Goldo, an imperial guard of the Kingdom of Mythos. Upon learning their royal status, Rait is astonished. Lumia reveals that she is Lumia Mythos, the daughter of Lias Mythos, the 14th king of the Kingdom of Mythos. Rait, typically cautious in dealings with higher status individuals, recognizes the importance of treading carefully in this situation. He snaps back to reality when Lumia offers her assistance, prompting him to consider his next steps with greater deliberation. Upon learning of their royal lineage, Rait is puzzled by the presence of only one guard with the king. He reassures himself that they must have their reasons for this. Lumia then requests him to keep their true identities confidential. Leaning against the wall, Rait agrees to maintain their secrecy and introduces himself as Rait. Rait, pondering his next steps, tells Lumia to wait until her father wakes up before he decides on further actions. Lumia, tense, reacts anxiously, realizing that his decision hinges on whether he will offer his assistance. He quickly interrupts her, affirming that they need his help. Startled, she instinctively covers his mouth and inadvertently reveals the truth. As she tries to correct herself, Rait gestures to her to pause and advises her to eat first. He steps outside, builds a new stove from stones, and retrieves the frog meat he previously stored from the item box. Feeling relieved and refreshed, he concludes that the raw food remains preserved in the item box without spoiling. He arranges the skewers around the fire and waits for them to roast, while Lumia watches with bewilderment at the unfamiliar food. When asked, he explains it's skewered monster frog, though he admits he doesn't know its exact name. Lumia appears uneasy about eating such exotic meat in the unknown. During their conversation, Goldo brings a chair for Lumia. Rait playfully teases her about the antidote jars, suggesting they're safe from the monster's poison. Impressed by his bravery, Lumia sits down on the ground near him, embracing the freedom of a simple life she finds both novel and appealing. Seeing Lumia's admiration for Rait, Goldo intervenes abruptly, placing his hand between them to halt their conversation. He warns Lumia not to be deceived, noting that while he too was once a commoner, he never ate unknown creatures like Rait. As Goldo steps in, Rait swiftly dodges his hand to avoid interruption. Lumia, anxious and puzzled, turns to her guard, who adds that they don't use Antidote as a digestive aid either. Meanwhile, Rait, undeterred, continues cooking. He seasons the meat with salt and enjoys it with enthusiasm, finding the taste even better than he expected. He reflects that the meat is truly delicious, surpassing his initial hunger-driven impressions. As Lumia watches, Rait eats with evident curiosity. Goldo warns her against trying the food. Both she and Goldo turn their attention to Rait when he inquiries about their provisions, noting that this food is likely inadequate for a princess. Goldo, with a hint of sorrow, admits that they are unfortunately out of supplies. His confusion grows as she learns that despite traveling with the royal family, Goldo did not bring any provisions. He explains their situation is complicated and expresses his helplessness. Observing Goldo's sad response, Rait decides to wait until the king awakens. He offers Goldo a sample of the food before it is given to the princess. With her consent, Goldo takes a bite and is immediately impressed by its deliciousness. Overcome with delight, he laughs and continues eating, proclaiming it the best food he's had in a long time, even surpassing his past experiences in the capital. When Rait reveals that it's meat from an unknown frog, Goldo, brimming with enthusiasm, insists on identifying the monster and importing it to the capital. Rait recognizes that Goldo is truly a food aficionado. Seeing Goldo's enthusiastic response, Lumia smiles and shares with Rait that Goldo has a notable weakness for excellent food. At court, he often skips formalities in favor of indulging his appetite. Although Rait had already guessed Goldo's foodie nature, he appreciates the insight. With a joyful tone, Lumia interrupts Goldo's feast, seeking his approval to try the food herself now that he has tested it. Goldo, still savoring the meal's unique flavor, gladly permits her to eat, further admiring the remarkable taste. Lumia, delighted, begins to eat the meat, while Goldo watches closely to ensure it poses no threat. Using his magic and metamorphosis, Rait conjures a dining table and crockery. When Lumia inquiries about plates, Rait directs her to use the newly formed tableware. Both she and Goldo are astonished, unable to fathom where these items came from. Goldo inspects the setup with shock, and Rait momentarily worries he might have made a misstep. However, Lumia reassures him, affirming that everything is perfectly fine. In a regal fashion, Lumia takes her seat, cuts the meat, and tastes it with a fork. After just one bite, she is genuinely impressed, finding it as delectable as fish, rather than frog. Noticing Goldo's eager expression, Rait purposely praises the meal's exceptional flavor and asks if he would like to have more. Although Goldo is tempted to indulge, he restrains himself, citing his duty as a bodyguard to conserve food. However, Rait, using his magic, produces a generous amount of meat from his item box, assuring Goldo that they have plenty and he can eat to his heart's content. Grateful, Goldo eagerly accepts the offering, declaring his debt to Rait. Overwhelmed by the delicious food, he joyfully hugs Rait with one arm, his massive frame making Rait look small in comparison. After enjoying the meat, Goldo tells her that such exceptional flavor is rare even in the castle. She concurs, noting that Rait identified it as frog meat, though she finds it curious that such delicious frogs exist. She speculates that they might be Gallia frogs, but this guard interrupts, explaining that Gallia frogs are notoriously difficult to prepare. He adds that these frogs are not easily served in the middle of a forest due to their complexity. While Rait listens quietly, he grows suspicious when Lumia mentions having eaten Gallia frogs, which he has never heard of before. He questions Goldo to verify her claim, learning that cooking Gallia frogs is indeed challenging. Goldo recounts that when the king requested Gallia frogs, the royal chef struggled with only 1 out of 100 being edible. He explains that these frogs contain about 10 poison sacs, which if damaged render the entire frog poisonous and uneatable, and these sacs are extremely fragile. Upon hearing about the frog, Rait shows it to them, asking if it's the one they're talking about. Both of them gasp in shock, recognizing it as the Gallia frog, and immediately worry whether he served it to them, given its danger. When Rait confirms, he requests that he teach Goldo how to cook it. However, they are all startled when they hear a knock on the door. Goldo quickly grips his sword and asks Rait if he's expecting someone. Holding a knife, Rait calmly informs them that no one, including himself, would willingly visit this place. Pointing his sword towards the door, Goldo instructs Lumia to step back. Initially confused, she then considers the possibility that the person knocking could be Razel, their guard who went to seek help. This thought resonates with Goldo, who also finds it plausible. To confirm, he calls out, asking who is at the door. Recognizing Goldo's voice, the person on the other side confirms he is Razel. Goldo sheathes his sword as Rait opens the door and invites him in. A young man with a sword enters, respectfully greeting Goldo before expressing his relief at finding the princess safe. Goldo then inquires whether Razel managed to summon help, but Razel, with deep regret, explains that he couldn't find anyone nearby. This house was the first one he encountered, leading him to knock and find them inside. Goldo praises Razel for doing a good job, but he apologizes for returning empty-handed when he was supposed to find help. Noticing the peculiar surroundings, he then questions why the princess is in such a place, eyeing the frog, hanging herbs, and jars of medicine with suspicion. Goldo then introduces Razel to Rait and explains that this is his house. Razel remains suspicious, noting that he has not heard of Rait's name before and questioning whether he is an ally or something else. Goldo reassures him that Rait is just a commoner, despite appearances. Still concerned about the princess being in a commoner's home, Goldo explains that a lot has happened since then. The princess interrupts to praise Rait, explaining that he not only helped them by killing the beasts that attacked but also healed their wounds. Goldo adds that the king is also present, resting in a room after being poisoned by the bear monster. Noticing Razel's worried expression, Goldo assures him that the king will recover quickly thanks to the antidote Rait provided. After hearing the conversation, Razel's suspicions grow. He questions how Rait happened to be nearby exactly when Goldo and the princess were attacked and how he conveniently had an antidote ready. Filled with confidence and anger, Razel immediately warns them to leave the place, insisting that Rait has a hidden agenda and that staying there is dangerous. Rait finds Razel's speech notable but remains silent in his defense. Lumia, with a troubled expression, explains that the forest is filled with monsters, making this house the safest haven. She then scolds Razel for disrespecting Rait, who saved them. As Razel is about to respond, Rait shifts focus by opening a window and remarks that if he had any ill intentions, he wouldn't allow them to wander freely in an unlocked room. Razel retorts that he only opened the windows due to Goldo's presence, otherwise he would have already chained the princess. Rait interrupts, explaining that if he intended to kill them, he could easily do so, even if they attacked him together. His hesitation proves he has no intention of harming them. He adds that Goldo is the strongest among them. With confidence in his sword in hand, Rait asserts that if he were to face Goldo, he would need only 10 seconds to defeat him. After hearing this, Razel shouts in fury and warns him to be cautious with his remarks, as he's insulting the knights. Although Rait attempts to clarify himself, Razel starts to berate him. Seeing the situation escalate, Lumia rushes in and admonishes Razel to cease his harsh language. He tries to apologize and explain, but she firmly interrupts him, preventing him from saying more. Then she commands Goldo to behead Razel if he defies her orders again, as it constitutes high treason. Reacting swiftly, Goldo draws his sword and places it menacingly at Razel's neck. Alarmed by the gravity of the situation, Razel breaks into a sweat, bows deeply before Lumia, and pleads for her mercy with a heartfelt apology. Rait finds the royals intimidating. Despite Lumia's previous demeanor as a normal girl, her recent actions reveal a formidable side. Although the immediate problem seems resolved, Rait perceives Razel's deep resentment and decides to clarify his position to prevent future complications. He requests permission from Lumia to speak, and upon receiving it, he quietly proposes a duel with Razel. Initially shocked, Lumia ultimately consents. Holding his knife firmly, Rait challenges Razel to a no-rules fight, asserting that if Razel wants to make him regret his arrogance, he must face him. Despite initially fearing he would stand no chance against a skilled knight in a fair duel, Rait, confident in his assassin skills, resolves to use every dirty trick at his disposal. As the fight nears, Rait reassures him that it won't be a fight to the death. It will merely be a mock battle. Then, by holding his knife, he clarifies that he wants to engage in this fight to better understand Razel. Lumia agrees, though she remains somewhat uncertain, knowing that Rait's fighting skills are formidable. She explains that a knight's training is a royal responsibility, and she doesn't want to trouble Rait with it. He tries to ease her concerns, emphasizing that addressing any misunderstandings now will simplify matters later. Lumia acknowledges that while Razel may not be fully prepared to be a knight, his strength is genuine. Goldo, confirming Lumia's statement, warns Rait not to underestimate Razel, as he is among the top 3 in the elite Imperial Order of Chivalry. Despite this, Rait remains determined to fight. Just before the duel begins, Razel inquires if there are any restrictions or if anything is allowed in the fight. With confidence, Rait tells Razel that any tactic or weapon is permissible, and Razel can approach him with lethal intent if he wishes, as Rait has a remedy. Razel looks puzzled at the sight of the medicine jar, and Lumia explains that it is a powerful magical healing liquid, which she considers a basic-level potion. Razel remains uncertain about whether Rait is just an ordinary commoner. Goldo, sharing his initial doubts about Rait, now realizes that Rait is likely no ordinary individual. He notes that the tonic Rait has used could sustain a regular commoner for their entire life. Razel concludes that Rait must be a physician. Goldo, with a confident nod, agrees, noting that someone with the skill to create an antidote and the effects of this potion could indeed be a personal physician to a kingdom. Razel, however, expresses skepticism, questioning why a kingdom would release such a skilled doctor who possesses a potion of such high value. Rait, upon opening the jar and realizing the tonic's significance in this world, is surprised by its importance. He reflects that in VLO, those who craft potions are known as alchemists, whereas in this world, they are called physicians. Rait remains puzzled by their discussion, as it seems rare for a physician to create a level 1 potion. In his view, crafting such a potion should be within reach of anyone with level 10 alchemy skills. He recalls that achieving level 10 alchemy was straightforward, often accomplished by consistently brewing potions over 3 days. He remembers that in VLO, beginner alchemists would stockpile ingredients specifically for crafting level 0 potions. This makes him wonder if the process differs in this world. Rait snaps back to reality as Goldo supports Razel's suspicion, noting that even for a physician, crafting a level 1 tonic is a challenge. Moreover, living so deep in the mountains might suggest that he fled from somewhere. Razel then asks Rait to clarify. Considering their curiosity, Rait thinks it's acceptable that they see him as a doctor on the run, but he prefers they remain unaware of his origins from another world. Clearing his throat, he redirects their focus away from his past and towards the upcoming battle. With his sword in hand and a scowl on his face, Razel taunts Rait for not trusting anyone unwilling to discuss their past. However, Rait remains firm, insisting that his past is irrelevant to the fight. As they lock their eyes, Goldo steps in, offering to referee the match. Positioning himself between them, he gives the signal to begin. After getting the signal to start, both Rait and Razel stare at each other. With intense anger, Razel charges at Rait, gripping his sword tightly. In response, Rait quickly casts a bright light spell, so dazzling that Razel yells out in pain and shuts his eyes tightly. Taking advantage of the moment, Rait leaps into the air and aims to strike with his knife. Lumia and Golda watch closely, amazed, but they are stunned when Razel, despite his closed eyes, easily blocks Rait's knife with his sword. Razel taunts Rait, saying that while the light magic might blind him, it won't be enough to win. Impressed by Razel's ability to fight even with his eyes shut, Rait realizes he is facing a skilled knight. He understands that a great swordsman can sense their opponent's presence and fight effectively even in darkness. Although Razel looks young, he is clearly very skilled. Now Rait wonders what strategy he should use next to overcome such a talented fighter. Observing Razel's skills, Rait considers that defeating him might be straightforward. He only needs to mask his presence, close the gap, and thrust his sword into his neck. However, he reminds himself that this mock battle is not merely about winning. It's meant to highlight the disparity in their abilities. Noting Razel's confidence in his sword, Rait concludes that the only way to secure victory is to confront him directly. Therefore, he strengthens his resolve and attacks Razel's sword rather than aiming at him, producing a loud clash of metal. Razel's face now shows concern as he struggles to halt Rait's assault. Despite his efforts, Rait continues to press his attack with his small knife, revealing an unexpected strength. Razel is further astonished when Rait declares that he can exert even more power. Using magic to enhance his strength, Rait amplifies the force in his arm, intensifying his grip on the knife. Worried, Razel attempts to counter by insisting that raw strength alone cannot guarantee victory. Ignoring all protests, Rait relentlessly forces his knife against Razel's sword. Within moments, he cleaves the sword into two pieces. Razel, stunned and bewildered, stares in disbelief at the broken halves of his weapon. As reality sinks in, he cries out in dismay when Rait announces that the match is over. Disregarding all objections, Rait persistently presses his blade against Razel's sword. In mere seconds, he splits the weapon into two fragments. Razel, astonished and perplexed, gazes in disbelief at the shattered halves of his sword. As the situation becomes clear, he exclaims in distress when Rait declares that the duel is finished. Then he grips his arm with his other hand, noting that although the level of magic has only caused a minor muscle ache, he realizes that using this spell against a more formidable opponent would have been excruciating. However, he considers himself fortunate, as Razel's abilities do not appear particularly formidable to him. On the other side, upon realizing that his sword has been split in two, Razel collapses to the ground, overwhelmed with disbelief. For him, it seemed impossible for anyone to sever such a weapon. Meanwhile, Rait taunts him briefly, explaining that it's due to his unique fighting style and the fact that they were still engaged in a normal combat. Razel gazes at Rait with deep confusion upon hearing about the special sword style. Rait quickly clarifies that he was merely jesting and admits that he used transformation magic to shatter Razel's sword, as the sword style he mentioned was merely a basic technique. Goldo, visibly shocked, expresses disbelief that Rait could break the sword despite its ordinary style. He now understands that Rait was not exaggerating about his strength. Noting the concerns of those around him, he questions whether the sword was truly exceptional. However, he reflects that, based on the sword's feel earlier, he did not consider it to be of high quality. With a heavy heart, Golda reveals that the sword was a masterwork crafted by the renowned blacksmith Ramis. He further explains that it was presented to Razel as an honor when he was elevated to the rank of Imperial Knight. Seeing the distress of those around him, Rait now realizes the gravity of his action in breaking such a revered weapon. To make amends, Rait picks up the broken halves of the sword and offers to repair it by reassembling the pieces. However, as he touches the sword, Razel, enraged, shouts at him to keep his hands off it. In a swift motion, Razel seizes the sharp edge of the sword from Rait, cutting his hand and causing him to cry out in pain. With fierce anger, Razel declares that he cannot accept the repair. Clutching the shattered sword, he turns and storms away from them. As Razel begins to leave, the princess commands him to halt. With intense frustration, she first reminds him that the duel was sanctioned by Rait, so she will excuse it. However, she then chastises him for his rude conduct toward Rait, asserting that, as a knight, he should be embarrassed by his behavior after such a defeat. Turning back, Razel appears to want to speak, his face filled with sorrow. However, the princess cuts him off, stating that he has made numerous mistakes. She emphasizes that not only did he insult Rait, their savior, but he also displayed arrogance even after losing the mock battle. She declares that such behavior from an Imperial Knight is a disgrace to their nation. She promptly bows before Rait, apologizing on behalf of Razel. she acknowledges that it is her duty to address her subordinate's lack of training. Observing this, Goldo urgently calls out, asking her to lift her head and reminding her to consider her own position. She then turns to Goldo and inquires what punishment he believes would be fitting for Raizel's inappropriate behavior. Glancing at Raizel, Goldo states that not only did he defy the princess's orders repeatedly, but he also disrespected Rait even after losing the match. Such actions tarnish the honor of the Imperial Knights, leaving him deserving of the death penalty. She first gazes at Goldo with a sorrowful expression and then admits that she shares the same thought. However, noticing how she nervously grips her dress, hesitant to issue a death sentence for Raizel, Rait realizes that despite Lumia being a princess, she is still just a 15-year-old girl. She doesn't truly want to execute a knight she has spent so much time with until now. Interrupting their discussion, Rait suggests they consider an alternative punishment for Raizel instead of death. Goldo, with a sorrowful expression, explains that if it were any other Knights Association, expulsion might be an option. However, according to the strict rules of the Imperial Knights Association, death is the only acceptable penalty. Lumia reluctantly agrees, while Raizel stands there, his face filled with deep regret. Rait interrupts, asking them to pause for a moment, assuring them that there's no need to kill anyone. The three look at him with hopeful eyes. Internally, he reflects that death is an excessively harsh punishment for mere rudeness, a perspective shaped by his origins in another world. He further considers that since the Imperial Knights Association is responsible for directly protecting the royal family, it's understandable that their rules are particularly strict. Rait shares his thoughts, acknowledging that the princess likely doesn't want to issue a death sentence. He points out that if the king wakes up to find a dead Imperial Knight, it could negatively impact negotiations. While he realizes he has no obligation to protect Raizel, Rait concludes that shielding him from death might ultimately work to his advantage.
Here I am,